The title of my talk is The Art of Presence. And so, of course, I will talk about the arts, I will talk about presence, and I will do so from the perspective of a media communication researcher. And more specifically, I will talk about how we can use the arts as a tool for media literacy education. But before I get further into this, I would just like to say a couple of words about myself. Julian already did, but just a few more things. I am from Austria, so I grew up in these mountains in the south of Austria, close to Italy. And it is where nowadays I spend my holidays. And I live in the place where most people come for holidays, which is in Lisbon, Portugal. And just because I needed, to complete the geographic triangle, I now study in Burma, where I'm doing my PhD in media and communication. And as Julian mentioned before that, I have a background in arts and literature, which is what I did for my BA. And then I did an MA in anthropology. And I then ended up working as an artist for more or less a decade. So around 10 years, I made sculpture. And my sculpture was basically about people. In particular, my focus was on how bodies can visualize people in our lives and how each body tells us unique stories about people, about who they are or who they want to be. And so through my sculpture, I wanted to show the beauty of this human individuality and diversity. And it basically was my objective to make people aware that each of us being different is not a weakness, but that it's a strength. It's what makes us unique. And that there's no other, but that actually there's a shared us and the collective we that, connects us all through this diversity, actually. And then I got to a point in my work where I realized that in a world where we need to click buttons to confirm that we are human, I can no longer talk about people and society without understanding how those are being impacted by the omnipresence of the digital media devices today, in our day-to-day. Our daily lives have been, our daily lives have become so entangled with technology that it's impossible to talk about people or the world we live in without also talking about the implications that technology has on our personal and social lives, but also on political decisions and global affairs at large. So I actually ended up dedicating my work to this research. And now I consider myself more of a researcher than a practicing artist, but I do connect the fields. And so in particular, I'm studying how our constant engagement with our digital gadgets, and of course that to a great extent refers to our phones, affects how we are present to the people that surround us in our physical proximity. How we interact with people and how our phones often make us absent, distracted towards those that are sitting right next to us. So I ask questions like, what happens to my presence when I pick up the phone? What happens if you or I look at my phone while we are talking? How does that affect the way that I relate to you and relate to me? And how does it affect the way that we actually cultivate relationships and emotions? And while in my work, or particularly in this talk, I mostly refer to presence within the shared physical space, this is also relevant when we are in a digital space. So it's also relevant for us here now in where we can't, see each other, where we're not in the same space, but we share this digital space. And while I'm talking here, I can't see most of you, so I have no way of knowing where your attention is directed to, whether you're present to this moment or not, to this talk, because, you might be answering mails or scrolling down your social media feeds, or someone might have gone shopping or something. Or you might actually be present and listen and pay attention. So being present can also happen online. So it's not only possible in a physical space. But, that's a whole separate area of study that I can't go into detail here, but, it was just to also point out that it is possible. And so I ask whether it's still possible for us to be present in the same space, let's say for this, hour that we are here together, and how comfortable we are with our own and with the presence of others. And so it all comes down to how is this presence being challenged by the ubiquity of media devices. Now, research argues that technology has placed a distance between and around us, and that this distance results in interpersonal divides and in civic distance. And that, there is a need to decrease the distance and bridge this divide if we want to promote more caring and just environments and, futures, basically. But of course, in order to do that, we don't have to abandon technology or stop using it. First, I don't think that would be possible, but also it's not really the goal, but it's about, but we need to prioritize proximal environments. So, shared physical spaces, and also reinsert human values into media and our ways of interacting with them. And so in my research, I argue that we need to recenter presence within our human interactions in order for us to promote caring environments, so care for others and others. And so in my PhD, I created this project that aims at making people aware of how present they are in their face-to-face engagements, engagements and the physical space that surrounds them. And it is this critical awareness of how they use media literacy in relation to their human interactions that I refer to as media literacy in this context. So the project consists of a series of workshops that make people engage with artworks, which address media and their effects on us and on our presence from different perspectives. And what I do is, participants in the workshop, they look at artworks, so they see an art exhibition that is being set up, or that was set up before the workshop. And then they discuss the artworks, they touch them, they engage with them and so on. And then they make art themselves. This is one example of an artwork, a performance that came out of one of these workshops. And by doing so, the participants hopefully will gain a critical awareness of how their engagement with their phones or other devices tends to remove them from their physical surrounding and their personal interactions, and how this may negatively affect their capacity for empathy and as such their ability to care. Now, just a little bit about presence itself. What is presence? I've mentioned it many times now, but I haven't talked yet about what it is. So what do I mean, or what is meant when we talk about presence or being present? Well, there's actually a whole research field called present research, and there are many different definitions. However, recently researchers have tried to limit the number of definitions and to kind of find the consent on what is the most important approaches in order to have a clearer concept to work with and relate to. However, there are still too many for me to list them all here. Again, it could be a whole talk just about what presence is, but I just want to, give a few examples. There's a very generic way of defining it, which is the feeling of being there. And then there are more specific ones. For example, this one by researchers Whitmer and Sinja, which is the subjective experience of being in one place or environment, even when one is physically situated in another. And this one refers to, our experience or our feeling of being present when we are in virtual spaces. So that, that's actually a big focus of this research, presence research. How do we feel present when we are actually in a virtual space? And when you ask people, it's also very different what people, feel or define presence as. Even though I've noticed, I've collected definitions of presence from the workshop participants, and there are common aspects that do link most of their definitions of presence. So just to give you a few examples here, one person said that being present means not just sitting in the place, but also engaging in face-to-face conversation and using your brain to think about the content of the conversation. Another one said it's to be here and in the now, mentally, emotionally, physically. So I'm not thinking about any other place or person or thing. I'm here. Yet another one says when I am the level of present that I am right now, I feel sweaty and alert and uncomfortable. It's not a bad feeling, but it's intense. And, if you remember the slide of the naked people in the library where I asked, how comfortable are we with presence? This, nicely refers to it, and also, shows that up to a certain point, we have become unfamiliar to a certain type of presence because we are, we have the comfort sometimes of a screen behind us, and we can curate our conversations differently than, when they are in person. And the last example is being present is to not want to be anywhere else, to be able to fully absorb your surroundings. Now, at first sight, this subject might mostly seem to be relevant to our personal and individual relationships and surroundings and personal development. But it's also actually very important to look at this from a wider social perspective and to understand how we as individuals and then small communities and bigger communities and so on contribute to shaping society as a whole, how it's all entangled with each other. And I think it's never been more evident that, the comfort and the privileges we have been living in the past years or decades, and this I'm speaking from a European perspective here, that those privileges are not to be taken for granted. We certainly live in very disruptive times in which one crisis and conflict follow another, and it has become increasingly harder to stay optimistic about our future. COVID certainly challenged our idea of stability, of democracy, and of institutional trust. And while it's not like all the problems appeared during the pandemic, they did become more evident. And while lockdowns and social distancing fortunately seem to be behind us, at least for now, the spread of conspiracy theories, of growing polarization, and of social instability have come to stay. And we do see populists continuously on the rise. Now, the everyday news about current conflicts, about new wars and old wars going on and breaking out again, and so on and so forth, are a reminder that social and individual rights, freedom, peace, and justice have to constantly be defended and reconquered. There will always be disruptive events, wars, crises, and so on, unfortunately. But that means that we will always have to put a great effort into imagining and creating more peaceful and just futures, and into building them. And that's where the arts come in. The arts and culture can give a voice to the issues of our time, so we can use the arts to imagine different futures, and we can, and that's what I argue in my research, use the arts to promote presence, and as a result, promote care for and about others. But, why the arts? Well, the artworks and arts are as diverse as people. The options when it comes to materials, formats, the artistic intentions, and of course the topics, they are endless. And so the visual languages are very diverse, some of which we might find more pleasing, more subtle, and others we find more crude and maybe even unsettling. And the same topic can be approached from different angles and be expressed in entirely different ways. So we can, in this example, address climate change by showing and reminding us of the beauty that's being lost, like in this installation of porcelain objects. Or we can emphasize the status quo by using the artwork as a magnifying glass of what's wrong in the world. Or again, we can actually invent new languages, unexpected ones that often, might require to engage might require the viewer to engage further with the artworks, to read about it, and so on, to understand what's actually going on and what the work talks about. And I chose this example of a performance in the Lithuanian pavilion at the Venice Art Biennale in 2019, which tackles climate change by recreating a beach scene within this old factory settings. And the viewers are up top, and view this scene like well, like a performance, right? And at certain points, the viewers are even, asked to come in and participate. But independently of the format, art always tells stories. It's stories about people and about the world that we live in. And by telling these stories, art opens up ways of seeing. And as John Birch has said, it is seeing which establishes our place in the surrounding world. We explain that world with words, but words can never undo the fact that we are surrounded by it. And the relation between what we see and what we know is actually never settled. And so the way that we see the world through the arts as a looking glass, of course, always depends on the historical, on the geographical, and on our personal context. So what we see in an artwork and how it may impact us is always shaped by our personal experiences and by our stories. And also the meaning of art changes as the world around it changes. So an artwork might have a meaning at some point of history and a different one at a different point of time. And so in my research, what I propose is that there are several qualities that are inherent in the arts that we can use to teach media literacy. So we can, use those qualities and apply them. And the first quality that I point out is time. Art provides us with time. Well, whether we look at it or whether we make art, it makes us stop and take a moment to look. We live in a high-speed world where we are overloaded with images, with headlines, and there's no final page to close the book. It just keeps going. But in order to think and reflect, we do need time. And art can create moments in which we need to stay still and look and wait so that we can see. And also, if there's no time, there's also no space for imagination. And because we are so filled with stuff, and I'm purposely not saying information here, but stuff, content, that there's simply no room or very little room left for imagination. Because we don't get bored waiting for the bus anymore. We don't have to invent things to do. We can always fill our brains and occupy our time rather than letting the brain wander. And wandering also creates. We want to let the brain create new stuff, invent stuff. And so the second quality of the arts is that they trigger imagination and they provide a language to express what we imagine. And imagination is actually especially important in the light of the constant crisis that we've been living, because if we just keep thinking and hearing about the bad things, we are going to lose hope. And so this excessive amount of negative news and the toxic online environments can result actually in apathy and compassion fatigue, which is a term that's used by some researchers. So we cannot show only or look only at the things that are wrong, but we also need to create positive scenarios, hopeful scenarios of what we want to see and live in the future. So we need to imagine the worlds we want to live in. For one cannot change the world without imagining what a better world might look like. And art can help us do just that. But the arts can not only help us to give shape and to express what we imagine, it can also be used to make visible what already exists, but what is usually not seen. So, technology is actually omnipresent in our daily lives, but a great part of it does remain invisible. Do we know where the information that we consume actually comes from? Where is that big entity that we casually refer to as the cloud? Or, where does the energy come from that is needed to power the technology? I would argue that most of us don't know. We have a vague idea, but we don't know. Because you actually have to do an enormous amount of work to put yourself in the position to see something. That's what the artist Trevor Pagan says. And what he did is he went to the bottom of the ocean to look for underwater cables, for the underwater internet cables. So he trained for several months to become a diver. And then with a whole team of researchers and other divers, they went to the bottom of the ocean to find the internet cables that pass under the sea. And then in this image, you see here, that's how he presents it in the gallery. So you see the photo of the beach where they started the dive, where you don't see anything, it's invisible. And then there's a map where he draws where the lines actually run through to give it the shape to make that visible. And what the artist wants to do is to make people aware that the technology that we use as a commodity is actually an infrastructure, that it's an economic force, a political tool, and actually a very influential social agent. And so by allowing people to see what otherwise remains hidden, these artworks, and this is just one of many other examples, they do promote knowledge about media, and as such, media literacy. And as I showed you before, the arts have infinite options when it comes to the languages that are used. And as such, art also provides us with a shared language that can go beyond ideologies, preconceptions, and polarization. It's a language that can foster dialogue and provide spaces of encounter. And I want to show you this. Stop still. And I want to show you just a couple of minutes of this performance by the artist Sean Leonardo. He invited people to debate gun violence. But the debate is made not by using words, but by using movements. And what he talks about is the fact that words, especially when it comes to issues that are emotionally charged, can actually get in the way of communication and productive debate. So just run a couple of minutes.
The premise of this piece is to look at the ways that debate has evolved. We now occupy a time and space where communication has devolved to a strategy of proving oneself right.
It's because we fight with words that we can't actually come to the table prepared to have a productive debate about our differences.
And I knew there was potential in enacting a series of workshops with 4 divided groups that we read as divided around a central issue as gun violence, and bring them then to a moment of reckoning, to debate one another without using words.
Okay, and this was just the beginning. The video is around 15 minutes. And I really recommend it. If you're not curious, it's really powerful work and a very good example of how we can use the arts to promote dialogue. So, and it shows that we can use the language of art to actually create safe spaces for people to be present and for people to be vulnerable and to develop care for each other. And this brings me to the 5th quality of the arts that I want to talk about, which is the power of the arts to create an emotional impact. And this is really the key to education or any change we want to promote, I would think. Stephen Duncombe, who is an American media and communication researcher and founder of the Art of Activism Center, created the word affect by joining the 2 words, affect and effect. And what he says is that you need to affect the person in order to create an effect, in order to create a result and an action. Because he says before we act in the world, we must be moved to act. And so, if we want people to take action, to care, and so on, we need to create that emotional impact. And that's what art does. It moves us. That is what we, or at least I, ultimately want media literacy education to do, and probably education to a large extent in general, I think I could argue. We want to move people. We want to stimulate their imagination. We want them to care, to make them care. We want them to be present to something. And we want to promote agency. And that is what my research project is really about. It's about providing an engaged environment, a space where people use their imagination, where they experience interaction, dialogue and emotion through this shared language, both as individuals and as a group. So a space where they feel what it means to be present, or what it can mean, and how to care for and with others.